Hi, everybody. I just started a minute early just to make sure everybody got a chance to get in before I do the introductions. Um, we have about 160 people booked in for this seminar this evening, so it promises to be a great evening. Um, I have the question and answer function ready to go, so you can ask questions all along, and then we'll answer them at the end. Okay. So we'll start. Good evening, everybody. I'm Betty Stenson, the Programming Officer at the Irish Writers Centre. The Irish Writers Centre was thrilled to announce a new partnership with Notre Dame, Kylemore, under the auspices of Notre Dame University for 2024. In our first collaboration, 3 writers were awarded a fully catered 5-day residency to pursue their work in the beautiful grounds of Kylemore Abbey, County Galway. And the writers were Kieran Fitzgerald, Henrietta McCarvey, and Rose Ugola. This free seminar this evening is our second collaboration, and we're delighted to welcome Claire Kiefer, Programmes Manager with Kylemore, and she'll be in conversation with the renowned writer Heather King. Céad míle fáilte, Claire and Heather. So over to you, Claire, now, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Betty, and thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Heather, for being here with us. We are delighted to be continuing and expanding our partnership with the Irish Writers Centre with this webinar, which we have designed and set up with the Writers Centre's help in the lead up for a memoir writing program that will be running in Kylemore in September. The program is 5 days and it will be led by Heather King, who will take us through some wonderful workshops. So you'll be hearing Heather speak about her practice and her life this evening. And I'll introduce Heather now. So Heather King is a writer with a dozen books, a former commentator for NPR's All Things Considered, and an award-winning arts and culture columnist. She also speaks, edits, and gives workshops and retreats. Heather King has written memoirs about alcoholism, parched, food, famished, gardening, harrowed, money and earning, loaded, converted to Catholicism, redeemed, and Saint Therese of Lisieux, shirt of flame. She writes weekly on literature, painting, dance, and film for Angelus News, the archdiocesan newspaper of LA, and she is thrilled to share her experience, strength, and hope with other aspiring memoir writers. So welcome, Heather. And just to get us started, for my first question for you this evening, I'd like to ask you how you first came to writing.
Oh, well, thank you, Claire, and thank you, Betty. And I just have to first say, I'm so thrilled and humble. I feel like I'm gonna start crying already. You know, if you're a writer, you know, you spend about 90% of your time alone. So it's really wonderful to be welcomed, especially to be welcomed by the August Irish Writers Centre. I'm deeply, deeply grateful again and humbled. So thank you for having me. And how I came to writing, it's, I mean, that's, you know, do we have 15 hours? I mean, I joke that I've written a book about every single thing that's ever happened to me. So, but coming to writing was, besides getting sober 37 years ago, coming to what I see as my vocation as a writer has definitely been kind of the central point of my life. And I'll just say, I grew up in the coast of New Hampshire, a small New England town, working class family. My father was a bricklayer. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had library cards. and we had books, and my father would recite poetry. And I mean, he was born in 1921, and so they would, as a kid, they would have the kids, maybe you do this in Ireland, memorize poetry. And so we were steeped in, we really valued books, and I was an avid reader from a very young age. I mean, that was, a library was the closest thing to a kind of temple that I knew. And as I look back, it was almost an like erotic feeling to walk into the library, the smell, the shelves of books. So I just always, books have just been like the savior of my life, or one of them. I have an actual savior, but and so I would imagine, oh, there's people who write these books, and I just considered them like gods. Like, I couldn't imagine. I thought they must live in some special place, and what would that be like? And so the point is, I think, had this kind of mythic desire to be a writer myself, but I just thought it was so far beyond my reach. I think it was just, oh, no mere mortal could achieve such a thing. And then I started drinking when I was 13 years old, and alcohol, because I'm an alcoholic, I have whatever alcoholism is. I had it really badly. I blacked out the first time I drank. I couldn't remember the last 5 hours. And the point there being that alcohol became my God, my organizing principle. Everything revolved around it, and all these deep passions of my heart, the passion for, I mean, I still always read, even in the dark years, as I call them. I always had a library card, would make a pilgrimage. I was living in Boston, to the Boston Public Library. But my desire to write myself fell by the wayside. And that, I think, is one effect of alcoholism. It kills your actual dreams and passions. So I went on for years, really. I drank for 20 years. I went to law school, somehow had no desire to be a lawyer at all. No capacity to be a lawyer. I joke that even agreeing with people makes me nervous, never mind arguing. But there was this law school up the street from my loft, as I called it, in Boston. And so I just applied to this one place and went to law school, really as a way to tell myself, just to sort of protect my drinking. Oh, I'm going to law school, I can't be that bad. I knew I had a problem. But anyway, it all came to a head, and I graduated, passed the Massachusetts bar. I couldn't even sit up straight for 8 hours. So my family sent me off to rehab, and I have been sober ever since. And that was a huge, huge awakening. And along with the awakening, though, I woke up and I had this law degree, and I was just like, what am I supposed to do with this? I didn't even want it. And yet I felt super guilty, because my poor parents had just agonized over me. They had helped send me to law school. So I felt like I should be grateful. And I had this thing that people would give their right arm. People would give their right arm for a law degree. Come on, step up to the plate, be grateful. I got married, I moved to LA, passed the California bar, and I started working as a lawyer. And I was in my early 40s by this time, by the way. And I tell all this because my whole thing is like this huge invitation to people, whoever, wherever, whatever your station in life, wherever you are in life, it is never too late. And if you have that desire in your heart, it is not going to go away. And what happened was, as I'm working as a lawyer in Beverly Hills in my little suit, and it was so like a fish out of water, and my little high heels and my briefcase. And I just had this major, like an existential crisis, because I had kind of achieved the American dream. Not that I'd ever much wanted to achieve it, but, I was married, which was good after my life in the bars, believe me, and I really got, I want to settle down and be faithful to this vow. you know, I was making money. That's the other thing, is making money for the first time in my life. I had supported myself by waitressing the whole time that I drank. Hated waitressing, was a horrible waitress. Was like drunk all the time. And so I was making money, and I think I had like health insurance for the first time in my life. I was 41 or something. But this call came up from my heart that I thought surely I had killed during those years of drinking. And there it was. And the call was, I wanted to write, you know, I wanted to write. And it just seemed like, oh, please, you've always had your head in the clouds. You've always been a pipe dreamer. You never can function in the world. You can't fit in. And now you're going to quit your job as a lawyer and start writing. I mean, come on. But there it was. And I mean, I've written, in a way, this is a theme that runs through many of my books, but I actually, the point is I also started during this time, not to make too huge a deal of it, but I started because I was in such anguish and I really didn't know what the right thing was to do. I really wanted to be a stand-up person and do the quote right thing. And, you know, I think we sometimes get we misinterpret the idea of God to think God wants us to do the grim, hard thing that will build our character or whatever. And I got, you know, I started reading my childhood Bible that I carried around. I'd been raised Protestant, but I was, you know, had not been to a church in like decades. But I saw this line in the Gospels, and it said, "Don't store up your treasure on earth." See, I still can't say it without crying. You know, where moths can devour and rust will corrode. Store up your treasure in heaven, for where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. And somehow I just eventually got the courage, or whatever it was. It wasn't courage, but it was something else, to follow this call in my heart. I quit my job as a lawyer. I found freelance work to make a living, and I began what turned out to be a long apprenticeship. You know, I just wrote for 4 hours every day for years. I didn't make any money or send out anything for years. But I was so happy. I was just so happy to be able to be doing what, you know, I'm not fit for anything else. Wasn't fit to be married, as it turned out, because I'm not married anymore. But during that time, I just was on this deep, deep quest for kind of the meaning of life and all of it, and ended up somehow, long story, but yeah, coming into the church, which for me was not a place of bondage and rigidity and oppression, but for me has been total freedom from having to bow before the God of money, property, and prestige that kind of rules our culture and our world. And I have been able to just go a different way. So that's kind of how I came to writing. And then I just have never, you know, I had that working class mentality of like, this is a job. Also, I've always had to pay my rent. So I never had time to sort of, oh, I have writer's block, or, oh, this is so hard. It's like, oh, I am so lucky. It is hard. And I'm so lucky. And let's get down and sit down and work. So.
That's beautiful. I just love the idea of following your heart's call, following your calling. I also just wanted to say, for anyone who has questions, please pop them in the Q&A section at the bottom, and we'll answer them at the end. So yeah, thanks for telling us about the beginning of your journey, Heather. Definitely something that is always good to hear for any writer, I think. And a question about more your craft and the craft of memoir writing, I guess. So in your books, you've written so many books. Each book has a title that reflects the main theme. And I know some of the themes appear in different books, but definitely from reading your books, they do strongly always go back to the one theme that the book seems to be launched on. Your first book, Parched, is about alcoholism, and that is, you know, there's no getting away from that throughout the book. And so I was wondering how what you think about writing a memoir thematically versus chronologically. Do you think we should tell our whole life story in a memoir, or what are your thoughts on, yes, picking a theme and then how to order it as well within the memoir? So that's a many-layered question. Versus chronology in a nutshell.
Right. Yes, and there's no cut and dried rule. I mean, people write memoirs very different ways. I think to start with, we couldn't possibly fit all of our life. I couldn't even fit a day of my life into, I mean, it could take volumes. So you have to absolutely, I think, narrow things down or focus in. I mean, my overarching theme, I think, is always sort of death and resurrection in some way. You know, I've heard it said a story is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. You know, a story is not, my mother is a horrible narcissist and ruined my life. Like, that's a really long anecdote. It's like, okay, that must have been really hard. And now, and how, you know, now what? Like, how are you different now? So, and I think we have to be careful. Yeah, you don't want to write a memoir, to my mind, you know, that has an axe to grind, that is going to settle a score, that is going to tell people how hard it was for us. I really think, you know, I'm very drawn to, there's a lot of incredible Holocaust memoirs. And you read these people, if anyone has a reason to feel sorry for themselves or to complain, it would be someone who has survived a Nazi concentration camp. And some of the best of these, I'm thinking of this wonderful memoir, it's called And There Was Light, by this guy, Jacques Lusseran, Lusseyran, blind hero of the French resistance. I mean, he was blind. He got sent to Buchenwald, and he writes this memoir that is, he barely talks about the camp. He talks about how you have to go outside of yourself, latch onto something outside of yourself. If prayer helps you, great. If it's love for humanity, but you can. And so I think that's the thing with a memoir. We have to have worked through whatever our pain is, because I think pain, for sure, is often the catalyst for a memoir. But I think we have to have sort of worked it through, ideally, insofar as we ever work through our wounds, to the point where we have something to say to sort of all of humanity. But chronologically, yeah, I think chronological in a general way. I mean, in a way, I keep telling my story over and over again. You know, here's my story around money. Speaking of writing a book about everything that ever happened to me. I ate. Here's a memoir about food. I opened a bank account. Here's a book about money. But you know, this general, even say my book about money. Okay, so it starts out, I come from a working class family. Terrified. My father was terrified about money, 8 kids, a bricklayer. I inherited that. The impulse is to contract, spend as little money as possible, you know, live this super sort of telling yourself you're being virtuous by leaving a small carbon footprint and all of that. But, you know, there's something wrong in there. It's based on fear. It's not based on love. So in a sense, it's like loosely chronological, where you're telling the story of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And it's always, oh, I don't have to be this way around money anymore. I'm not sentenced to sit in a bar stool and drink myself into a stupor every day. You know, it's like, I'm not the hero of my story ever. It's always something greater than me. But yeah, like Parched, we talked about this a little bit before. Parched starts, my first book, and it starts with this day. I'm in Boston. I'm just at the dregs of humanity. I'm hungover. I drag myself to work. I go to a bar after, as I often did. And my brother was coming down from New Hampshire to pick me up because it was my father's birthday. It's about 40 miles to my family home in New Hampshire. And so there's this cliffhanging thing of, and I'm sort of in my head thinking of the way that I'm suffering and why, and this is horrible, and I know it's my fault in a way, but how do I get out? And then, it kind of ends and it's like, oh no, oh crap, I forgot to buy my father a present. And then it goes back to, because as it turned out, that birthday party was actually an intervention that my family was holding for me. So then I go back to my childhood, starting kind of chronologically, but it gives the reader right from the beginning a sense of, okay, this is a book about someone who really went down the tubes with alcoholism. And, in the back of your mind is like, okay, what's going to happen when she goes up to this birthday party? And so then it all unfolds at the end. But so there's many different ways, but I think for sure there has to be some overarching a theme, and maybe the theme is something as simple as I grew up, or I matured, or this thing that seemed to be the worst thing formed me in a way I never could have imagined. And though it was in a sense the worst thing, it's also kind of been the best thing, like that.
Wow.
But it comes from, you can't plan it out beforehand. I mean, outlines, I make outlines. A lot of my books, I mean, they're nonfiction, but they may be more like I wrote a book about prayer, for example, that's not so much chronological, but is more like, like sections of, that would have like sort of chapter, subject heading type things. But you can't really know until you sit down. You have to sit down in that chair. I mean, we will do anything to avoid it. Let's buy a new laptop. Let's buy a beautiful notebook and a nice pen. And let's go to even a writing workshop, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But like at the workshop, hopefully you got to sit down and write, there's no avoiding it. And that's how everything unfolds. That's how it unfolds. You can't envision the whole thing beforehand. It unfolds day by day.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Yeah. Writing from the pain. Definitely a lot of us have felt that, I'm sure. I have another question that a lot of memoir writers, I think, grapple with. I was wondering how you balance the need for privacy in your personal life with the need for honesty in your books. I mean, you shared a lot of your journey here this evening with us, and in your books you share it even more. And that kind of been easy. I'm thinking about the writer Claire Wills, who I went to see recently, and she spoke about what it felt like when she saw her family history spread out in the front page of the Irish Times. She speaks of her family's connection with the Magdalene Laundries in her recent book. And so, yeah, I was just wondering how you manage putting yourself out there, putting that vulnerability out there for all to see, for the people you know to see, for people you don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's interesting. For whatever reason, it has never been hard for me. I have enough of a narcissistic personality disorder. So I will say, I can't write fiction at all. I tried when I began, I can't. So I'm really my range is very limited. And then within that, I just find I find just the way life unfolds fascinating. I find other people's stories fascinating. So I've always had this urge, and the urge is, it's like the woman at the well, Jesus meets this woman at the well. She's an adulterer. He says, yeah, you do have 5 husbands, right? She's kind of sleeping around, and he says, that's not really working for you, is it? And she says, no. And anyway, they have this moment of intimacy where he sees her, she feels seen, and she runs back to the village to tell the people, I've met him. I've met the Messiah. And I always feel like I'm kind of like that woman at the well, running back. Oh, check it out. I don't have to act like I used. Oh, I mean, not in an evangelizing people to Christianity way, but in a way that, a resurrectional kind of, we don't have to live in bondage and darkness and despair our whole lives. And probably like the people in her village, like nobody, 95% of people don't care at all. And so, but that enthusiasm for whatever reason is kept fresh. So in short, again, I'm not the hero of my own story. It's always, I think, something greater than me. And therefore, to share my experience, strength, and hope around, say, my recovery from alcoholism, or money, to move from like a super like hoarding almost mentality to, no, it's okay. Like, it's okay. God can handle that. I, buy a nice bar of soap or whatever. Even though, yes, there are people starving in the world. So, I mean, look at St. Augustine's Confessions. I mean, St. Augustine was basically, saying, I'm a sex and love addict, as we would term it today. But he's not going to go into the graphic details of sleeping with his mistress. And it's the same with me. I've never, ever, to go into that kind of, things people don't need to know, like share in a general way. And therefore, I think I get a total kick out of kind of telling on myself. One thing that I still am like this, but I would love to go off to monasteries and convents and retreat places and go off for a week of solitude, and so we'll go off to these silent retreats at some, Holy Trinity monastery or something. And then after a while, I realized every single time I went, I would almost instantly conceive a violent dislike for someone else who was at the retreat. So, I realized, oh, this is a thing. This is funny. I'm trying to be more loving. I'm trying to be, not really holy, but just, and here I am, and I bring myself with me, and I can't get along. I have a hard time getting along with people, and can I just admit that? And so I love that stuff when the scales fall from my eyes and I see how blind I've been in a certain way. I mean, I've also written about probably my tenderest book, and this was a long essay, is called Poor Baby, and it's about healing from abortion. That is a super, super tender place for, I think, just culturally, obviously, personally, it's something that people even we women tend not to share about. It is something that you carry very much. I think that's something you carry in silence, and for me, in deep, deep sorrow for many, many years. So, when I wrote that, I was actually, speaking of retreats, I was at this place called the Franciscan Appalachian Hermitage in West Virginia. This wonderful woman's Sister Jeannie McNulty rented out these little cabins for $20 a night. She had the Blessed Sacrament in this straw bale chapel out in the holler in the middle of nowhere. And I just sat there for a month trying to get to the truest place in me to write about my experience with the whole the whole thing and getting really deep into my heart, oh, God bless you, like, what was I doing sleeping with these guys? One of them was a married man, who obviously didn't care about me. I couldn't really care about him. But again, not in a graphic or even a confessional way, but in a way that is really meant to go out to the world and hopefully speak to other women in my position. I think I will say, my first book, Parched, was a kind of family memoir, and my idea was, oh, my family will be thrilled. I saw it as a love letter to them. I would personally love if someone wrote about me. I just assumed everyone would be. I thought, oh, I'm just telling the, kind of, the true but sort of funny, affectionate portrait of my family. And I showed it to each of them. At the time I had 7 siblings. One of us has died. I showed it to them before it was published. One of them made me take him out of the book completely. But anyway, I mean, I think writing a family memoir is a very tricky thing. I don't regret it. I would probably have written a few parts differently, but it's a truism. Everyone experiences the family very, very differently. There's a 13-year age gap between me and the youngest. And I just think there are like hard feelings even today. And it's, again, I don't regret it. And I think we do have the right to write about what our experience was of the family, and in a sense, I suppose, be some kind of truth teller. I mean, a family with alcoholism in it automatically has, I think, usually a huge, the elephant in the room. No one talks about it. Everyone walks around it. Let's minimize it. Let's pretend it's something else. And so I think there's a deep value on many levels in kind of telling the truth. At the same time, I think I would be way more protective now of my family's feelings of seeing them written about than of my own. Like, I totally have the right to write about myself in whatever way I want, but and even though I did run it by them, but yeah, I barely write. Also, my family, this is another thing. If you're contemplating becoming a writer, well, anyway, yeah, my family's just not interested. Like, they're not, like, you kind of think like, oh, I'm gonna like carry the standard for the family and like, take my stand for art. And yeah, they're not really interested in my writing at all. And so I've learned they don't have to be interested. And but I think I'm way more protective of their sort of privacy and confidentiality, and desire apparently not to be sort of written about, even if in a totally loving way. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I have one last question for you, and we'll go to Q&A. Lots of great questions coming in. So for my last question, I was wondering if you could tell us about one or two or a few pieces of advice that you would give to aspiring memoirists who are at the beginning of their journey, who are maybe considering writing a memoir, or who are starting a first draft and who feel kind of stuck.
yeah, I mean, I think that all those go to sort of writing in general. And of course, memoir writing really is kind of my, I guess you could say, my forte. Even my arts and culture pieces, they're very personal. Like, they're not I'm not a reviewer. I'm not a journalist. So my sort of take on things is often in there. But I mean, I have this big, it's on my website, this quote from Chekhov, you all know him, of course, the incredible Russian playwright and short story writer, who said, if you want to work on your art, work on your life. And I just love that, because I just feel like my writing can be no better than kind of the state of my soul in a way. If I'm consumed with resentment, bitterness, self-pity, that's going to be reflected in my writing. So I get to, my life is really ordered to art, in a lot of ways. I'm not married, I don't have kids, I'm not under order, I'm not under any order or institution, or, I mean, even my paid gigs are freelance, so I don't answer to like a worldly, but I'm very obedient. I actually love the idea of obedience, which means to listen carefully, and I don't answer to the world, although I want the world to love me and I want to serve the world, but I really answer to the call of something higher. And therefore my life is, in a lot of ways, it's very free, but it's very ordered, like I get up, I sit, I pray the divine office, I pray, that's the first order of the day, guide my thoughts, guide my black heart, turn my heart from stone to flesh, please. Answer my emails, my way of doing things is, and this is what I would encourage would-be memoirist writers of any kind. Don't feel you have to go follow some cookie cutter way of the world. When I started writing, I had no mentor. I still don't. I didn't have a cheerleader. I didn't have a master's in fine arts. I didn't have, I had no one who sort of had my back or to cheerlead or say, oh, good for you, you wrote for 4 hours every day. I mean, my marriage kind of ended, in fact, because I became a writer, and but I just wrote about, I never considered the market, what people want to read. I don't, I hope you want to read my stuff, but like what I know is I want to write it. And so this really being true to our own hearts and kind of putting the spirit, put the spiritual first, and the material will follow. And by spiritual, I don't mean like burning a candle or even saying the rosary, or, I mean, those kinds of devotional stuff, which are great. And I do that stuff too, but I mean, believing with all your heart that what we do matters. Sitting in front of our desk matters, whether anyone sees it or not, whether anyone validates us or not. Art, literature has saved my life. Let me do my bit to put myself, that kind of thing. And because I'm not fit for anything else, it's like, can I at least be faithful to the one thing I am fit for? So I would, so all of that goes to, I think you have to have a very deep sense of the value, profound sort of cosmic value of art and of your own writing in general, and your own sort of call to write. And then that's what's going to keep you at your desk. And if you're blocked and I mean, that's just fear. It's fear. What will people think? Oh, what if I don't have 8,000 Instagram followers? Oh, what if the woke police tell me I said something wrong? All that stuff that I think now more than ever is very, and I just sort of pay no attention to any of that. My obedience, my call is to my word. And I write about what I love, not what I'm against, not to sort of carry a picket sign, but this is what I love. And these are the writers and filmmakers and dancers. And when you watch their stuff and read their sort of approach, they don't talk about politics. They talk about their devotion, their love, and their passion. So I would, whatever you can do or need to do or can think of to do to like kill those voices in your head that are criticizing you and accusing you and saying like, you can't do it. And who are you to write a memoir? And who are you to think you're a writer? And who gave you permission? Everyone has permission. And if we let those voices win, that's like the forces of darkness winning. And we don't want those. We don't want those we want light and love and humor and beautiful art and creativity. That's what we want to win. Can I just say this last little bit? It's like 3 minutes. So I'm always looking for these people, other artists, they can be writers, but other artists who, kind of did it off the grid a little bit, you know, maybe didn't follow the kind of standard path. So I just discovered this guy, Daniel Brush, 1947 to 2022. He died a couple years ago. And he was a New York guy, lived in Manhattan in this huge loft that he bought for a song whenever he was married. He had a kid. And he was a sculptor, except sort of, he was a jewelry maker, ostensibly, but more like a sculptor. And he's just one of these guys. He would spend 4 hours every morning sweeping his loft. Like, sweeping was like a thing for him. He ate the exact same thing every day: a bowl of Cheerios for breakfast, a bowl of pea soup for lunch. You know, he was kind of eccentric, but he had this thing where he never had a dealer. He would sell his stuff. If you wanted to buy his stuff, you would email him. And if he liked the sound of your email, he would invite you to his studio, and then he would talk to you, and he would only sell his stuff to people who he sensed would have a personal connection with it. And he described it as going from warm hand to warm hand, which I absolutely love. And he says, this is a quote from an interview someone did with him. He said, if you can stop someone for a tiny bit, if my work can be a mirror in some way for their own feeling, they'll go and look at other art, and the whole experience becomes a beautiful thing. If they can look at my work and hear my heart pounding, what they really hear is their heart pounding. So that's what I hope for from my writing, you know, and I think if we kind of have that orientation, you can't go wrong. You might be poor, you might fail in a worldly sense. Who cares? Just keep doing it, you know, give it away. So there you go.
Wonderful. That's such a great quote as well. I had never heard of him. It's definitely a reminder that we can never hear too much, that artists can never hear too much, and writers can never hear too much. Honor in the chat says, I write what I want to write. And that's definitely, again, yeah, something that we, you know, needs to be said again and again, I guess, to keep those voices from coming into our heads. So I'll get a few questions to you, Heather, here. We've lots of interesting ones. And you were just speaking about how you seek out people with a uncommon trajectory. And Susan is asking, moving from the structure of being a lawyer to the freedom of a writer, how do you manage that transition? How do you choose to structure your writing projects? And she also says, thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, you know, and I just realized I could talk for hours about, at the same time, yeah, you put the spiritual first, the material follows, and we need to pay our rent and put gas in the car and all of that. And so that is part of like working that all through, and money, earning a living is all, to me, that's part of the ordering of my life to art. But yeah, that requires a whole ton of work and thought and interesting pondering too. But well, the transition, as I said, was, I mean, I didn't do the thing of like, oh, I'm just going to quit my job. And right now I saved up $28,000. I absolutely remember this. And I quit. This was back in 1994 or so. And I got freelance work, doing freelance kind of legal writing and writing motions and briefs and things like that. And I made probably $75 an hour or something like that. So that was good. My expense, you know, I've always kind of lived below my means. I was also married at the time, so I was only paying, you know, half of the rent and everything. But so I made sure, in short, that I had a way to earn a decent living, because otherwise I'm a super anxious type anyway. I can't be destitute. I can't be worrying how I'm going to pay the rent. That would take up way too much room. You know, my life has to be kind of ordered. I don't like a lot of ambiguity. I don't like relationships that are kind of like in, out, hot, cold. Is this person my friend or not? But as I said, I right away, as soon as I quit my job, one of my heroes is Flannery O'Connor, who you may know, Catholic novelist and short story writer, 20th century American. And she, I read in her letters, or thought I did, that she wrote for, she had lupus too, so she was sick a lot of the time, but she wrote for 4 hours every day. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write for 4 hours every day. And so I did that for years. You know, I'd really sort of sit down at 8 in the morning and write until noon. And this was before the internet was, you know, grabbing us at every, or I should say, I allow myself to be grabbed. So I think it was a little easier then. Also, I was younger then, but that's what I did. And it was many years later, I read she only wrote for 3 hours every day, but the die was cast. So I really put in that time. And then, and I don't do that. I don't write for 4 hours. Well, some days I probably do. I mean, now, you know, that was before I had I didn't have anything. I had nothing published. I had no, you know, life of a writer with giving talks or retreats or people emailing you. So, you know, my time was able to be super focused. But even then, I still kind of do the same thing. Right. I would still start the day with prayer. I go for a walk. I'm really big on this. An hour-long walk every day, just out my door. It doesn't have to be fancy, but just out, walk, you know, all kinds of benefits for that, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Look at the flowers, see the sky, think about stuff. You know, now I will often go to daily mass, so that I'll fit that in, or like a recovery meeting, or but then I also spend a ton of time sort of reading and looking at you know, what's like film, and you know, one thing leads to another, and discovering new people. And you know, I'm always have my ear open. Oh, could I make an arts and culture column out of this? Or, oh, here's a quote I could bring to my writing workshop. I mean, I get to bed, you know, I don't drink. I mean, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I'm celibate, like very consciously, you know, so it's like a real, it's a very monastic, and joyful existence, you know. It's like there's a frame around my life. I will say, apropos of, back to, in a way, the confidentiality and stuff. I mean, the other thing, because my work is very much also like warm hand to warm hand, my stuff. This guy, Daniel Brush, also had this great quote. He said, I have 10 people who are totally devoted to my work, and 5 of them died. You know, so this thing of having a kind of small but devoted audience and kind of personal, but at the same time, I have to have major boundaries, because even though I will respond to almost every person who writes to me, I don't have time for an ongoing correspondence. I'm not going to be your best friend or even your friend, you know. I mean, if you write to me every 3 months, I'll email you back, but I'm not going to get into it that, you know, people who like need more than you can give. There's a certain kind of guy, usually a married guy, who thinks you're going to be a soulmate because they just like identify so much with your work. And that's beautiful. And I've learned, yeah, that's great. Thank you. You know, thank you. And let's move on. Yeah, and I go, you know, I'm an early riser, early to bed, you know, usually watch a movie or read at night. But yeah, I don't have a huge, you know, I'm also careful about my social life. I'm a super introvert, so I can't really, you know, even like 3 coffee dates, say, a week would be too much for, you know. I'm older, you know, I'm older than I was when I started too. So I'm very careful about my kind of time, energy, etc. all goes to the writing, you know, all funneled in. Yeah.
Yeah. A question from Rose. Rose says, "Hi Heather, just wondering, is daily journaling a part of your creative process? And if it is, do you go back through your journals when harvesting ideas, memories for your work?" Thank you.
Yeah, also a great question. Yes, journal writing has been a huge part of my writing life. And for years, I mean, I've thrown out like the whole stacks of journal, you know, I'll do that thing where, I mean, my fear now is that people will see this stuff after I die, because for me, journaling is a lot of like getting out the stuff that I don't want to, you know, resentments and petty stuff. And, but for sure, no, actually, I don't write so much in my journal as I used to, but I still absolutely have one. You know, sometimes I do hard. I love beautiful journals. You know, I'll write longhand. I also have journal entries, a ton, years of them on my computer. But I wouldn't, like now, I wouldn't go back and look at them so much. If I use a journal thing, it would be something I wrote that day. You know, it's kind of like morning pages from the Artist's Way, where you're writing and then you realize, oh, this is a sentence. You know, you're journaling, but you're like, oh, this is an actual thought. This is a sentence. This is an observation. And then I'll just instantly kind of copy and paste it and maybe save it for later to elaborate on, but oh, maybe it's a blog post or, but yes, I find very, very, very often as I'm journaling, there's stuff in there. There's snippets, there's, yes, very, very useful. And I think just to get us in the habit of writing freely without feeling that judging kind of presence on our shoulder. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody cares. Let it go. And I think journaling is a great way to kind of get to our voice, you know, our true, because, you know, we try to sound, if you're anything like me, you know, you try to sound smarter than you are, or smart, or you're like, oh, this is a serious subject. I need to really, you know, pontificate about it. And then you realize, okay, this is so boring that even I'm falling asleep. And you're like, no, it's a serious subject. Doesn't mean you have to write in a boring way about, you know, it's like, what am I truly, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, our voice is like, my voice is still the same. The truest voice is like the same as when I was like 13, you know, like a teenager, you know what I mean? Where you're not completely jaded or anything yet, but you kind of like have very instant likes and dislikes, and they're kind of funny. And so you know, I think if we can tap into any place in us that's kind of free and true, if the journaling helps with that, great.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Another great question from Jean. Jean says, in my own memoir writing, I sometimes struggle to describe the undescribable, the spiritual, without sounding cliche, imprecise, getting stuck in Catholic tradition language ruts, such as God is love.
Mm-hmm.
Like description of big ideas, important life-changing moments of a mystical or spiritual nature come off as authentic, concrete, and relatable too.
Yes, this is a huge challenge, right? Because we don't want to sound cliche, and I mean, that stuff just doesn't move anyone. But on the other hand, you do, right, I mean, you sometimes see spiritual writing that's just kind of goes into this woo-woo cloud of unknowing, and a kind of like, what are you even talking about way. And again, I just think, for one thing, I can't emphasize enough, read other people's stuff. Read other, if you're trying to write a sort of Catholic memoir type thing, or based on, like, read other people who move you or speak to you, or who you think their writing is great. Like, how do they do it? I think, and again, I just think writing, it just doesn't come by sitting and thinking about like, oh, how can I, it comes from sitting and putting in the time. It's like prayer, like thinking about prayer is not prayer. Prayer requires you to bring your body and blood and freaking sit there in the anxiety, the seeming boredom, the nothing is happening, this is stupid, the what do I think I'm doing? I've got a million other things to do. And writing is like that too. There is no shortcut, but just sitting there. And you might sit there. All the great writers say, I wrote for 4 hours. I got one sentence out of it. I wrote for 4 hours every day for a week. The next Monday, I threw it all out. I mean, you really have to be willing to realize in God's economy, nothing is wasted, but put in the time. And I don't know, maybe even think about, how would I describe this experience to what was a deep experience for us, like to a 7-year-old, like in these very simple but concrete. I think the idea is we're incarnate beings, is to try to reduce, for me, this is how I often do it, the mystical, or however you want to put it, to the kind of incarnational. And I've written about receiving the Eucharist, for example. I remember this one time. I mean, how do you talk about receiving the Eucharist? It's beyond all comprehension. But I was sweating, and I was tired, and I was pissed, and I was on the verge of tears, and I was lonely. And, when I got up to the front of the line, and the guy in front of me was shuffling along too slow, and I got up, and the guy, and, the priest just said, like, the body of Christ. And I was just like, burst into tears, because it's like, oh, like I saw it with new eyes. It's like, oh, here in the midst of my poverty of spirit, like he's giving, it's a gift, so I just, or like, yeah, I think the other thing is to cultivate the eyes to see and the ears to hear, that like all through our day are these moments of, you begin to see something that we would have just walked by before. Oh, here's a playground full of screaming kids, pipe down, children. I'm thinking my deep thoughts, for example. And then you realize, oh, wait, like something happens and you have this moment. And so I wrote this piece on my blog yesterday this isn't like spiritual exactly, but it had to do with like ordering this like dressing gown off of Etsy from this guy in India. And, the thing got lost over the ocean or something. And, this kind of lost in translation thing. And just this funny human thing. And so I think it's kind of my favorite kind of writing, where you realize, oh, this is a moment. I know this is probably not directly addressing your question, but don't try to extract the spiritual from the material, the incarnational because everything really takes place through our bodies, right? And I think that's where we can maybe sometimes get across what we're trying to, bodies bleed, they cry, they laugh, they do all kinds of stuff. And if we can somehow get that in there, I think these deep mystical ideas can come through that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm just gonna quickly jump to Anne's question and just put a question in about the workshop in case you have to leave. And the workshop details are available on calmore.nd.edu. I'll put the link in the chat as well in a minute. But in the meantime, Heather, another question for you from Christine. Christine says, I started writing after a painful divorce and just sat down and wrote all in the third person, as I felt I could be more objective that way, and then found myself going back to my mother and grandmother, jumping back and forth. Is that a viable approach? Although would probably need a lot of editing.
Absolutely. I mean, anything is a viable approach that speaks to you, that works for you. I mean, as far jumping back and forth, that's can be totally fine. And we see memoirs where this has worked beautifully. I mean, I think there is a general rule of thumb. You want, though, always for the reader to be situated as to time and place. I mean, you can't just jump from, oh, I'm in the, living room with my horrible husband, and then like the next paragraph, Granny always, it's like, okay, wait a minute, we need a little bit of a segue. But yeah, of course it's viable. And if third person works, great. I mean, there's memoirs written in third person, and maybe later, or maybe you want to try a few, just for the heck of it, a few paragraphs in the first person, see how that feels, But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Whatever way comes to you is fine. And I think to get out that first draft is so important, to let ourselves do that. I mean, there's always revision. There's always editing. We don't have to censor ourselves before we've even started. So good for you. And isn't that interesting that in the wake of your divorce, your voice somehow is freed to, yeah. And mothers and grandmothers, I think especially for us women, right? Like everything goes back, in a way, everything goes back to mother, and there's a million different ways of telling our story, that story. So good for you. I say, keep going.
Beautiful. We have a couple questions from Sinead and Marianne that were quite, comprehensively addressed in terms of privacy versus honesty. So I hope Sinead and Marianne, we covered that in our answer. So I'll go to Alice's question. Alice says, I gave up drinking 30 years ago, so I can relate to the drinking binges, money wasting, and wild nights. However, I don't miss those days. I'm currently writing a memoir about my mom, who died last year at 91. I have written up to 4,000 words, but it basically focuses on her death in a hospital setting. I am focusing on the atmosphere and how her family and relatives react to create an emotional feel. But what is the best way to incorporate emotion? Thank you.
Well, I mean, that's our whole job in a way as writers. So again, I think the emotion comes though through the material, the concrete details, and actually the way we describe things. A deathbed scene, the room where your mother or your grandmother, or whoever is dying, you're going to describe it in a very different way if the atmosphere is filled with spirit and love, and of course you're mourning and there's deep sorrow, but that room is gonna look very different than the room where, and we know this happens too, the deathbed where the siblings who hate each other or hate the mother, or any number of things that can go, unresolved stuff. Like the room is going to be described differently. You're going to describe the people differently. So, yeah, I mean, just, I would say overall too, I love the idea of that. And it goes back to sort of theme and chronology. I mean, there's a million ways we could write the story of our mother, but we can't, but I think it's got to settle on one. For example, the way our mother died is one that's a great kind of overarching theme. Of course, you're going to talk about her life at some point or throughout the memoir too, but it's like leading up to this, how she died, or how she died being a reflection of the way she lived. It might be, our mother's mental illness, or our mother's alcoholism, or our mother who was a sewer, was a seamstress somehow, for example, just some skill that our mother had that we might not have at all, but that can become a theme that runs through, that becomes like a paradigm. The whole sewing, stitching thing becomes, you can hang like different kind of stories and anecdotes and a kind of chronology on that will carry through. Yeah, but how do we get emotion across is that's the big question. And again, think, the first thing is to really allow ourselves to feel the emotion. What you get to ask yourself, what was I feeling in there? And probably a million different things. I want to hold on to this minute forever. I can't wait. I love her, but for heaven's sakes, would she die already? Like, we can't bear hanging on one more, whatever the emotion was. You get it through dialogue with the people there, interactions with the nurses, all that stuff, everything that happens. So.
Great. Another question on your process. Eileen is asking, what's your writing process? Do you write daily? Do you set a number of words? Do you write in a set place, or any other advice? Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I definitely write in the same place, and where I am right now at my desk. I am not one of these people who can go to Starbucks or somewhere and write. I'm just, are you kidding me? I have to have complete silence and solitude. I do not listen to music, nothing. I used to, I think for many years, I never had a word count. That just didn't work for me. It's too much pressure. But I would definitely sort of have a time, I have to sit at my desk for a certain amount of time. I don't do that anymore. And I find, I always get nervous when I haven't written for a few days. And then I think, oh no, I'm totally dried up. And inevitably the day comes when I'm like, something interesting thing comes. I mean, I have a weekly column and I have for 10 years now. So every single Monday I have to submit supposedly 800 words max. It's usually more like 900, but so that in itself, I mean, I'm always, I'm either reading a book, then I have to, if you say you're doing a column on a book, I mean, you got to read the book, highlight, post-its, then I got to sit and think about it. What do I want to, what's my sort of theme? What's my approach? I just read this book, The Unclaimed. It's about the dead people, abandonment and hope in the city of Los Angeles. It's about people who die alone, and the county will take you eventually and cremate you. But like, there's tons of people, no one ever claims the remains. So it's this really deep question, questions about what if families owe each other and stuff. So how do I get that down to 850 words, everything that I have to say about that or can say? So yeah, I mean, I just have to sit down like any writer. It's like the point comes where it's like, okay, you have to sit down today and, and so my favorite kind of writing is where I just let myself write. I have a bunch of ideas, just willy-nilly write them all down, and then I'll get the facts in, if you're doing a book, like you have to have the, some kind of like who the authors are, for example, so you have to have some general situate, the county coroner, the blah, 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 blah. And then comes, usually the paring down, usually it's too long. And so I have to pare it down, pare it down, pare it down. So that's a lot of my, I mean, that's a column that, helps to pay my rent. So that has to sort of come first and get done. I also do a monthly column on, it's called Credible Witnesses. It's for Magnificat magazine. And so it'll be on this like, kind of unsung saint person. So that's another thing. But yeah, but I will just sit down and I'm a hyper responsible. Like, to my knowledge, I have never in my writing life ever missed a deadline. And, you know, I take, but partly because I just am so like codependent, like I couldn't bear to have someone be mad at me, but really it's like respect and love for the craft. And so I will go without food, sleep, anything to get, you know, get my work done. And, so I have that going for me, but other than that stuff, you know, that has to be done, even though I love doing it. I'll just, you know, sometimes I'll just be moved. I'll wake up and I'll just like sit down and write for 3 hours. And, you know, it might be an essay that I later sell. It might be something I just put on my blog. But, you know, if you love it, it's not a chore. Like, it sorts itself out, you know. And because I don't have another job that I have to show up to, like, this really is my job. It's my job, my pleasure, all of it.
Heather, I'm just going to jump in for a second. Excuse me. Claire is doing a fantastic job of fielding all these questions, and Heather, you're doing a fantastic job of answering them. We still have some time left, so we'll try and answer as many questions as possible. But if we don't get to all the questions, we will take the transcript and have a look at it and maybe send some relevant questions to Heather that haven't been answered. And maybe we'll do a little blog post or something and put it on our website, because the questions that are coming in are really interesting, and I think are answering a lot of queries that writers, especially memoir writers, might have. So take it away again, Claire.
Definitely, yes. So interesting indeed. And actually, this next one feeds in quite well into what you were just saying, Heather. It's from Donna, and Donna asks, how easy is it to go off on tangents when you're writing a chapter, and how do you manage that? For example, do you start with what you think you're going to write and get distracted by another overarching thought or direction you want to explore? Thanks, Donna.
Oh yes, the tangents. You know, a lot of times for me, it's like I have some anecdote or I have something that I think is really funny, that I just insist upon trying to wedge in, even though it's completely doesn't belong. So what I have is is a miscellaneous file for like every single document that I'm working on. You know, I'll of course save it, and then I open a new document and it's like, you know, danielbrush.msc. And then, so I have all the stuff that sort of doesn't fit. And then it's sometimes, there's, what's that line about pulling your hot claws or something off of, you know, kill your darlings. I mean, what works for me a lot is printing the piece out and even reading it out loud. I think that's how you weed out a lot of stuff that doesn't belong there, because, and also letting it sit for a bit, you know, let it sit overnight for a couple days, print it out, read it, and you can kind of instantly see, or I usually can, oh, this, what, like this totally doesn't belong here. It might belong in a different chapter. So I never throw, or very rarely throw anything out. I save stuff because it might belong somewhere else. But again, I think of it in a way as a courtesy to the reader. The reader wants to be situated. You know, if you were leading someone through a forest, you don't want to all of a sudden in the dark, just you go down this tributary where they can't even see you. They're like, what? Where did you go? You want to, as a matter of courtesy, keep them situated, do your segues. You know, there's another funny line about the hardest thing in literature is to get someone from the kitchen to the living room, you know, like this, again, this idea of segues, you know, of people need to see, and you don't have to write a chapter about it, but people need to see us moving from this place to that place and this house to that house. But yeah, it's, again, I think that is something that comes with practice and that we're never perfect at. I mean, even now, or maybe especially now. I mean, I'll read stuff that I wrote, even a column maybe from a year ago, and just be appalled and think, oh, why did you put that? That paragraph totally doesn't belong there. Then I'll want to blame my editor. Why didn't they take it out? But it's like, no, it's not really their fault. So that's something I think that gets honed over time. I mean, tangents are not always wrong, but they are if they take us far enough off course so that we get lost.
Yeah. Donna also further down says, I love that you mesh the dark with fun and the light in love. I often write memoirs so dark it almost cannot be told, but even in those times there has been something or someone so beautiful and pure that touched me in that moment, and I love to incorporate that. My work has since been called compassionate. I realize it's a survival instinct to do that, but important to share. So I think that also resonates with something you said earlier, Heather. So thanks, Donna, for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
We have a question from Gerald. Gerald is saying, I am trying to pull together a family story based on genealogy data. How does this compare to memoir writing?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Interestingly, my younger sister is really, really, really interested in genealogy, and so it's kind of, yeah, they're kind of two. Like I don't really like genealogy. Yeah, I want the story. I'm like, okay, well, you know, but was the third cousin once removed an alcoholic, or did you know what I mean? Like, I want to know, did they kill their wife? What? So genealogy, but obviously you could write a wonderful, I'm sure people have a kind of nonfiction book, and I mean, I don't know if you want to, yeah, I mean, genealogy is clearly way more, it's fact-based. It's not emotion-based or narrative-based. It's kind of, I mean, genealogy in its strictest form is like, you could make a tree out of it. Obviously, you don't even need words in a way. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you could write a memoir, though, about incorporating the genealogy, but about your kind of experience with your research, your interest in genealogy, how you got into it, where it led you, the interesting things. I think that would be fascinating. But or you could write more of a kind of how-to manual, or I mean, you can do whatever you want, you know, showing people, take them through your process of how you conduct genealogy. But yeah, either way, you could still absolutely write a memoir about the process of searching out your family tree or whoever's. Yeah.
Christina has a question that I feel you've answered about handling deadline and external pressures. I feel like we had a good answer there in terms of your writing practice. Julia is saying, wonderful to hear you, Heather, after being accustomed to your written voice for years. Writers and artists tend to be outcasts or very much cultural dissidents. Where's the line between selfishness or self-indulgence in your own interests versus just protecting your freedom, creativity, and authenticity? How can artists guard from becoming self-absorbed?
Right. And I think sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't guard very well. But obviously we want to guard against that. Again, I think it goes back to, if you want to work on your art, work on your life. I think to write from a sense of profound gratitude for the people who went before me. I have this passage in my book, Redeemed, that's about my conversion. And it's about the people, yeah, who went before me. There's these great quotes from like Kafka and Flannery O'Connor. You know, they suffered unbelievably, physically, mentally, emotionally. Many, I mean, look at Beethoven, not a writer, but going deaf, and they stayed at their you know, they remained there, they took their place at their station, you know, they never left their state, you know, like a guy who's in the lighthouse or something, they stay, and I just love that. That is my goal, and to yeah, so I'm sort of honoring the people that go before me. I mean, you know, and then we have other kinds of writing that comes from a place of, you know, basically, look at how I've suffered. I'm so fill in the blank. I'm so aggrieved. I'm so oppressed. My trauma was the worst trauma in the world, and you don't understand. And it's worse. I mean, listen, pain, absolutely, write from our suffering, we write from our trauma. But I think, to me, the memoirs that speak to me, again, listen, if someone who went through the Holocaust and survived can write a memoir that brings you to tears and touches the heart of all humankind, as was said, it's like, how can I find the light shining in darkness? I'm not talking about having a happy ending and airbrushing. No, life is full of suffering, you know, the human condition. We know we're going to die, for starters. I mean, it's a heavy, heavy duty thing. But there is always, in my experience, if I look hard enough, there is a light that shines in darkness. And so if I can keep my focus on looking for that, that is what guards me from self-absorption. And I will just say, I've written many columns on this idea that, oh, in this world that's falling apart and we have so many problems, it's an indulgence to be a writer, or you should only write or make art about, you know, that's basically propaganda. That is about, I am just 1,000,000,000% against. It's like, no, 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 no. The light, art is the light, one of the lights that shines in darkness. It is of unbelievable value. And to make it that is activism. It is a stand of resistance, again, against the forces of darkness. So I have been a zillion times more moved and inspired and challenged in my life by art and writing than I ever have been by, this is just me, by like a picket sign. It's just me, but you know, that's what I kind of stand with, and the people who have truly held, you know, to be an artist, man, is not for the faint of heart. I mean, let's face it, you see the poverty, you see great art. Rembrandt died in total poverty. Look at Van Gogh, look at, you know, so they stayed the course, you know, and thank God for them. So thank you.
We have a question from Amanda. Amanda says, I lost my husband in 2017 after a brief 3 years together. He was a Christian and asked me to tell his story. But although I have written different pages, I also get distracted writing poetry. I suppose I struggle to find my way in. Would you have any instinctual response to how best to find the story shape?
Oh, that's interesting that your husband asked you to tell his story. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I kind of think, why didn't he tell it himself? But maybe he wasn't able to, or his illness didn't allow him to. I mean, one thought would be, could you tell his story through poetry? I mean, if you keep being, quote, distracted by poetry, it seems to me that's probably poetry is a deep, deep call of your heart, and maybe where you're most drawn. So I would say that you ignore that at your peril. I mean, there's all kinds of, I mean, maybe follow that call now, put the writing of his story on hold, maybe see if it comes out through the poetry. Yeah, I mean, that's a very tough one, because we want to honor the requests of our loved ones, but to write their story is, Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. But you can, but if it's something you want to do, you'll find a way. And I don't know if you discussed it with him before, but I mean, you could just start, I mean, it's how we always start small, make an outline. How do you want to tell his story chronologically? What is his story? What's remarkable about it? I don't know how he died, or how he lived, but what's the theme that you kind of want to get across, and just start small, or start with, this is how my first book part started. Like, start with one anecdote, maybe an anecdote with you and him in it, or a mini story, and just write that, even if it happened midway through, or even if it was at his deathbed, or even if it was something he told you about his childhood. Write the one thing, and then things will often sort of accrete on either end. But just start if you haven't started. But yeah, if the poetry's calling you, I'm all about, like, the call. I think there are calls, vocare, we're called for a reason, and we can say no, but I'm not sure what that does for our soul if we say no to a call. So I hope that helped it a little.
Yeah, Amanda says thank you very much for this answer. Maybe one last question. Would that be okay, Betty? And then we'll close off. So one last question from Paul. Paul is asking, if you could give 2 do's and 2 don'ts in writing in this genre, what would they be?
I would say do write and do read. I would say don't procrastinate, don't censor yourself.
Excellent, amazing. You had right there on the tip of your tongue. That's fantastic. That's all we have time for, folks. We have so many amazing questions in the chat, and thanks for your lovely messages as well. We'll pass them on to Heather. Betty, did you have anything to add before I say thank you to everyone? Or
Just to say that this was a fantastic discussion. You were both brilliant, and I could listen for another hour, but I guess it's pretty exhausting for the people doing the talking. I can't thank you on behalf of the Irish Writers Centre. I can't thank you both enough. Claire, I know you put the details in the chat of Heather's residency, and please do go to the website and check out everything else that's happening as well with Kyle Moore. So that's bringing us to the end of this session. Thanks so much to the audience. Thanks for your participation. And I will do my best to get more questions answered for you, so that I do think that Heather actually answered a lot of the questions in the general discussion. But if there's anything that stands out, we'll address that again.
And I want to say thank you very much as well to everybody who joined. Thank you so much to Heather for your generous sharing and all your wonderful answers and your wonderful thoughts. And also a special thanks to you, Betty, and to the Irish Writers Centre. We were just so thrilled with this partnership, and we really appreciate the Writers Centre sharing their expertise with us at Notre Dame Calmore. So yeah, I've put the details for Heather's workshop in the chat. You can book it on our website at calmore.nd.edu. Go into programs, residency programs, and the workshop is called Capture Your Life's Fire. The link is also in the chat, and I believe it's also on the Irish Writers Centre page where you would have signed up for the webinar. And as Betty said, we run a number of other writing programs as well. We've in particular a very exciting writing program coming up that I did want to share with you all this evening. It's our new winter writing session. So that's a 5-day residency that will take place in December. And we will have a writer in residence who will stay with us, who will be a professional writer. He'll stay with us and he'll give a couple of workshops. And I can't reveal who it is yet. It will be made official soon. But I will just let you know that he's one of the most recognizable names in Irish literature. He was longlisted for a Booker Prize, and he has a lauded and applauded book out this year. So if you are interested in writing and in growing your writing, on your writing journey, I'd suggest you check out our winter writing session and stay tuned for that one as well. But of course, we're so excited to have Heather come to us in September, first of all.
Claire, did we mention the summer school?
And the summer school, I don't remember if you mentioned it at the beginning, Betty, but yes, and the next part of our partnership will be a very exciting reading performance by the poet and biologist Jane Robinson at Kylemore. She's coming up for an event, a biodiversity summer school, which Notre Dame Kylemore is running with a number of our charity partners who work in biodiversity conservation. And thank you for the Writers Centre for putting us in touch with Jane Robinson, and we're so delighted to have to be involved in the amazing climate writing program that you're doing. It's so the role of the arts in promoting ecology is so vital.
Absolutely.
So thank you for letting us be a part of that Writer Centre.
Thanks, Claire. Heather, would you like to have the last word?
Oh gosh, I just want to say thank you so much. I know I'm gonna log off and think, oh, I wanted to say this and I wanted to say that. No, I'm just, what a beautiful audience and such intelligent questions. And I just say thank you so much. Come to Kylemore in September. Yeah, and I hope to, thank you, Claire, so much. And Betty, just, yeah, you guys did so much work behind the scenes. So I'm just deeply grateful.
Thank you, Heather. So we'll say good night and see you soon again, I hope. Thanks a
Okay,
million.
great.
Bye-bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Dawn.
Thanks.
Dawn, good